can we demand a driver's license from somebody in sitting in the driver's seat because they are acting suspicious? My name is Anthony Bandiero. I'm an attorney and senior legal instructor for Blue Gold Law Enforcement Training, bringing you another roadside chat. So this question comes from an officer in California. He got a suspicious person call, and he gets out there, and there's a female in the driver's seat. There's a male in the passenger seat. And he tries to identify them. They're not really cooperating that much. Well, actually, the passenger is doing okay. He's providing some information, but the female in the driver's seat is not really playing ball. She's giving a first name only, this and that. And what can we do? Can we demand their license because they're in the driver's seat? Can we at least get them out of the car under Pennsylvania versus Mimms? What kind of options do we have? Well, let's establish some ground rules. The first one is reasonable suspicion. How many times have you gotten a call, a 911 call or whatever, dispatch, where the caller is saying, hey, there's something suspicious going on. There's somebody in my neighborhood and they're suspicious. What's suspicious about them? Well, I just never seen them before. It's a rich neighborhood and they're driving a crappy car, and yeah, they could be Uber Eats, but they're hanging out for a while. So people call this stuff in. Fine. But we want to make sure that based on those facts, that is not reasonable suspicion under Terry versus Ohio. That is a hunch. What people think is reasonable suspicion to them obviously may not qualify as reasonable suspicion in the eyes of the law. So I have seen many times where some officers have a culture, have a pattern and practice of taking these suspicious person calls and detaining people in order to figure out their story. And you ask them, hey, why'd you do that? Why are you stopping this particular person in this neighborhood based on nothing more than a resident calling you that they're acting suspicious? And they'll say things like, well, our chief is big on this, right? If they're calling for a reason, type of stuff, right? And we just want to make sure that we're delivering good service to our residents, and that we're not just ignoring these calls. Well, certainly don't ignore them. But the point is, just because your agency may have a culture of response to these calls, and I think that they should, because oftentimes people are calling in for maybe at least have a hunch that something's wrong, right? Maybe that person is looking for something to steal. But you can't detain that person for those reasons. So that's the first thing. What is reasonable suspicion? It's particularized facts that will lead a reasonable person to believe that criminal activity is afoot. Not feet, but is ongoing, right? It's ongoing. Like some kind of criminal issue is ongoing. Okay. Now, that we don't have that here. All we have is some generic call that these people are suspicious. The next thing is, once we see them behind the wheel, even if we can establish APC, actual physical control, or we can prove that they drove there. In other words, if we went up to the car consensually, don't put on the cherries and the berries, the red and blues, and make them feel detained. But if we went up there consensually and say, knock, knock, you roll down the window, hey, how you doing? Just checking on you. And they were drunk. Right? So that's, in most states you need actual physical control or driving. But you still couldn't, if they're not drunk and you have no proof, that they are engaged in criminal activity, you cannot demand their ID, even if they're, behind the wheel. Why? Because, well, Anthony, we have a statute. We have a vehicle code in California or whatever state you're in that says that essentially drivers must surrender their license upon demand. They must keep it in their possession. Well, that presumes that they are being detained and that they have a legal obligation to show their papers, their license, their credentials. Here, we don't even have that, right? The legislature does not have the power, does not have the authority to tell you that you can just go out there and just start demanding people's licenses for nothing more than just being in a car, having the air conditioner on, and listen to some radio during their lunch break. They need to be committed. You need to actually have a lawful detention, and then we can start demanding their license under that law and so forth. So we don't have that here. The next thing is Pennsylvania versus Mimms, which is our seminal case, which allows us to control the driver. Maryland versus Wilson is our seminal case that allows us to control the passengers and allows us to essentially get people out, right? Hey, come on out. Now we want use good judgment and have reasons for why we're doing things, and maybe explain to them why we're asking them out so we can try to de-escalate. And a lot of people that are ordered out of cars, they'll do the whole why? What did I do wrong? You have no authority. But yet, if the cop would have just been like, "Hey, I can't really hear you," or "It's not safe," just say something, right? It's not safe, or I just want to have a man-to-man conversation with you. You need to talk to me out here, And then a lot of times, cops can kind of like get their cooperation to come out. I'm just giving you some little pro tips since we're on the topic, but you don't have that authority either, because Pennsylvania versus Mimms is also a traffic stops case, and here they've done nothing wrong. So, at the end of the day, we're kind of stuck. If we can run the tag, which obviously we can, we don't need reasonable suspicion for that. We run the tag, we look at the driver's license photo, we see if that's our person. Here, actually, the cop did something clever. He got the first name, and he took the last name of the RO, which ended up being her mother, put those together, and actually found her in a database and ran her for wants. And she wasn't wanted, but that was like a clever move, right? That was a clever move. In other words, that's good investigatory work. But if you don't have that, then you have a consensual encounter, and there's no obligation for them to identify themselves or to produce their license, even if they're in that car and they have it running and so forth, right? There's no violation there. That's not you don't need a license, quite frankly, to be in the driver's seat of a car with the air conditioner on, listening to the radio. You don't need a driver's license for that. You're not driving in that sense. All right. So I appreciate you guys with these questions. If you like what we're doing around here, like, subscribe, share with your friends. Until next time, my friends, you stay safe and make good case law.